I prefer to be in a hotter country, whether that be in Bangladesh or somewhere around maybe the Middle East. But of course, I think it's best to talk to a travel writer today because he knows more about the world than I do. And of course, today we have with us Tharik Hussain, who is an author. He won't be talking about weather with us today, but he will be talking about his travels and his stories and what he's learnt on his journeys. So he is a journalist who specialises on Muslim heritage and culture, especially across the Western Hemisphere. Welcome, Mr. Tharik Hussain. How are you?
I'm very good, and thank you so much. And of course I'm going to talk about the weather. I'm British as well. It's a national pastime, isn't it? It's exactly why I'm wearing a sweater here in the studio.
Well, lucky you.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me on here again. I see it's now the Saturday show and not the Sunday show.
No, it isn't. It is the Saturday show, and I am hosting it this time. But thank you for coming. So obviously I understand your previous work has often served to decolonise the popular, religious and cultural histories as well as the narratives around it. I understand you're also the creator for the Britain's first Muslim heritage trails and you have produced award-winning radio for the BBC. So tell me a little bit about that today.
Well, to be honest, a lot of that work really came out of my own kind of search for an identity as a British Muslim, as a British Bangladeshi, and as a European, and so a lot of the work that you've spoken about and that I've done in the past, the books, the trails, is to really try and kind of enter that space, whether you want to call it travel, tourism or heritage, and try to decolonize the people who are dominating the space. So when I use the term decolonize, I'm not just talking here about the colonial legacy, which of course has had a massive impact on all of these areas. What we're really talking about is who is colonizing the space, whether it's heritage, travel or tourism, because whoever colonizes the space dominates how places, people, culture and so on are perceived by the rest of us. And this is what I really have tried to address with my work.
Okay, fine. So what have you found is your best piece of work? Obviously you're a writer. What did you enjoy most writing about?
I've enjoyed, I guess up until now, my best piece of work is probably the book that I've spoken about before. And of course, we have here a translation because that's one of the things I have been doing since, which we'll see in the video. And that is the book about a journey through the Western Balkans. And I would say it's one of my best pieces of work, not just because of the national and international recognition it has received, but I think because of the conversations it has started. I just came back from a travel literature festival in Venice, which isn't as sunny as it sounds right now. It's freezing as well. But while I was there, had I not written a book like this, I wouldn't be given a platform in a place like that to go and ask questions about whether the way they look at the world, whether the way they look at Islamic culture in Europe is a good thing or a bad thing. In fact, my entire trip to Venice was partly to give a talk, which I did, about Islamic and Jewish heritage in Europe, which is very underrepresented, but also because there's a publisher now interested in commissioning me to write a Muslim heritage book about Venice. So, none of this would have come about if I hadn't kind of shone a light on this heritage and made clear that there is this huge ignorance in places that maybe we just assume because of the popular narrative have no Muslim heritage or no Muslim history or nothing of interest for us as Muslims there.
Right. I think I had one question, which was how do you actually approach capturing the essence of a place during your travels? For instance, is there any specific technique or a ritual that you follow before going into those sorts of travels?
I think with any of these places, you have to do a certain amount of research. Of course. You have to know where to go in order for the stories to manifest and come to you. And another aspect of my journey to Venice, I don't just deal with history, I deal with contemporary culture as well. Most of our listeners, some of them sitting right now in their homes, are probably originally from Venice, in that Venice has a huge Bangladeshi community.
It does, yes.
Yeah, and so this is the other aspect of Venice that attracted the publisher to my name. He saw that, not only do I write about Muslim heritage as Bangladeshi, I often write about Bangladeshi heritage as well. And so in terms of how do I get these stories, I first do my research. I find out where these communities might be. I find out where this history and heritage might be. And then, of course, I've spent nearly 20 years traveling, travel writing,
Yes.
and over a period of time, you pick up the capacity of how to engage people in a conversation, how to meet with certain individuals, what kind of spaces you're likely to find them. And sometimes the conversation at a bus stop is far more interesting than the interview that you've
That is
arranged.
very true,
So
yes.
there is no hard and fast rule.
Okay.
You know, it's something that has to come in many ways
Naturally.
through experience. Of course,
Right,
you can
of
read
course.
all the how-to books you want.
Of course, yes.
But ultimately, you develop a sixth sense.
Right.
And I think, you know, as long as you do your research beforehand,
Yes.
and you build in enough time to go and find the stories that you haven't planned for,
Right.
then you are likely to come back with some amazing material.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, you have your amazing book, and of course,
Yeah.
what was the name of the book? If you just
Oh,
repeat
so
for our
the
viewers.
book that was translated in March is Minarets in the Mountains. It was translated into German, which is right here on the table, and we're also. It's also going to be translated into Chinese soon. So,
Oh, wow,
So that's
that's
like, you know, I
amazing
think it's like
achievement.
1/5 of the world's population covered there.
Okay, that makes sense. You need to have it for there.
So,
as
you know,
well.
I'm very, very proud of how well it's done.
Of course, and congratulations on that.
Later on, you'll see in the video, I went and did a wonderful launch in Berlin for the German translation. Most authors won't do launches
course,
for every
yeah.
translation, but it was my first one.
Yeah.
It was a very proud moment. And the reception there was fantastic.
Yeah.
I've had some wonderful write-ups in the
Yes.
German press. So, you know, it seems like it's doing very well there as well.
No, of course. And you did mention a video, and of course, let's go watch that video right now. And that was a small video of, like, I say small, I mean, the accomplishments over there must be very big, of course. So tell me a little bit about, you know, what's your most memorable encounter that you've had during your journey as, you know?
Yeah, so
in this book?
in what we saw in the video, there was a kind of roundup of what I've been up to since the last time I came here and went on and on about my work to channelless viewers.
We do enjoy it, don't get us wrong.
No,
we do enjoy
clearly.
it, of course.
And it's wonderful, of course, to be back.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things that I've done in that time is started the research for my next big narrative book.
Right.
And that's what the journeys were that you saw, where I went to Cyprus, I went to Sicily, Malta, and Spain and Portugal. So the next book is a journey through those 5 books. I'm
Okay.
sorry, those 5 countries.
Right.
And it's essentially, one of my friends put it very, very well. He said it's a prequel to this one.
Okay.
Because this one really deals with, you know, living indigenous European Muslims who have been around for 5 or 6 centuries here in Europe right now, in countries like Bosnia and whatever. And what I'm doing with the next book is I'm going through the Mediterranean, exploring where the Muslim communities first arrived.
Right.
And as I've said with the example of the Bangladeshis, have newly arrived as well.
Yes.
So there are Bangladeshi communities, there are North African communities, there are West African communities across all of these places. So I'm going to try to tell the story of the ancient as well as the
current
modern.
Okay.
You know, through and that's what some of those pictures there were, because that's what I've spent a considerable amount of time in all of those countries, and you would have seen some very interesting things there. Like, for example, in Sicily, the picture that was up there, it looked like a mosque to many people. That red
yes.
domed building,
Yeah.
and of course it's actually a church. And inside that church, I showed there's a pillar with Quranic inscriptions on it, because of course. What many people don't realise is that Sicily was an emirate for nearly 3 centuries,
Right.
and so it was a Muslim emirate.
Okay.
And as a result, it has this rich, deep history. Now, largely, you know, worked over or built over, as in the case of the church, which was on the foundations of a mosque, and
course, yeah.
the pillar probably came from
I've
a
seen
mosque.
that as well in my travels, where I think I went to Spain a year ago, and I found a lot of churches. I found their history, but I didn't necessarily find the Muslim history behind
Yes.
it. And then when I did try and go into depth about it, I couldn't really find much. And that's why it's really important to have these books. And thank you for, of course, writing these.
Exactly. And this is precisely the point I was making at the beginning. If somebody like yourself, even in a place like Spain, which is increasingly popular and a lot of people know about this, and I went back to Spain, I've been to it many, many times, and somebody like yourself who's interested in it, you can only go so far.
No, of course. And
you can only go so far because the research hasn't been done.
Right.
Because the writers and the researchers who have colonized that space, historically, they didn't wish to write about it for whatever reason. Or when they did write about it, they wrote about it through their lens.
Is there any reason why that's been the case? Or
Yeah, no, I think the most simplest reason, because we don't have much time, is the obvious. In Europe, when there was this, great battle between Muslim forces like the Ottomans, like the Umayyads, and the Christian forces, ultimately it was the Christian forces that won in those regions that I've just mentioned, especially the south of Europe. And as a result, of course, that's who writes the popular history. And that's what happens, and we try and flip that.
We're trying to rewrite it.
We're trying to kind of write it more comprehensively. And in the cases where it's been written in a very kind of skewed or very biased perspective, we're making it clear. Look, this is extremely Islamophobic, or this is extremely anti-Muslim, and then we're trying to bring about a bit of balance. But it's not easy. But hopefully one day you or your children or your children's children will be able to go to Spain and really appreciate the Islamic history.
And that said, of course, let's move on to your new book. I hear you're writing.
Yes.
So tell us more about the new book. What can we as viewers expect from this new book?
So this is a very different book to anything that I've done up to this point. As you can see on the screens, it's called Ramadan Mubarak, a little inspiration for the blessed month. Right. And it's more of a kind of gift book that people may wish to buy and give to somebody to help them through what can be a very tough month for many people.
Yes.
For me as a writer, it was something where a publisher approached me and asked if I'd like to do this. And it's, of course, like I say, very different to the things that I normally do. But what they realized is that Ramadan is a very special time for me. And of course, we're a long way away, but the book will come out just in time.
Okay, that's
so that
good.
there's 2.5 months ahead. But for me, Ramadan is a deeply spiritual time, a time that I use to reset my life, to reset my whole year, to rethink things. Ramadan is the time when you see on Channel S alone, you see all the charity raising going on. We're very giving during this time. But often what happens from the outside, for the non-Muslims, because this book is going to be published by a mainstream publisher, it's going to be in all the usual bookshops from W.H. Smith to, Foyles and online and everything else. Those non-Muslims from the outsiders often mistake Ramadan as being some kind of physical endurance of starving ourselves all day. And we all walk around looking like we'd rather be in bed, you know. And this is really to try and bring home the spiritual essence of Ramadan. Why do we do it? How it connects us to the akhirah rather than the dunya, which of course our listeners will understand. What I did is I went out of my way consciously to make sure it was balanced, to have enough female and male voices, because historically, unfortunately, Islamic literature tends to be dominated by male voices, and so we have a lot of female mystics in here. We have a lot of female poets and a lot of female scholars in this, being quoted in this book as well.
Okay, well, I'm sure the viewers will be very excited to read this book, and of course, I do invite everyone to buy the book, read the book, and obviously gift it to your loved ones. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
And thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.
It's been a real pleasure.
Guys, that was Tharik Hussain. Of course, that was an amazing view on, his travels, his writing, and of course the new book, Ramadan Mubarak.